A road can outlast the empire that built it, but it can't outlast the ground it stands on. The ancient world was held together by these masterful road networks. They were feats of engineering, perfectly fitted to the landscapes of their time. We're going to trace 25 of these forgotten highways. Each one is a story. Human ambition meeting a planet in motion, and by the end, you'll have a new understanding of how climate, geology, and time itself can turn a vital artery into a ghostly imprint. We'll see how entire routes were plotted for coastlines that are now underwater. We'll see trade corridors that vanished when their desert oases turned to dust. What does it mean when the very land a road was built for just walks away? This exploration is a testament to ingenuity, but it's also a humbling lesson from the past. These pathways lie silent now, under jungle canopies, beneath desert sands, at the bottom of the sea. They hold secrets about civilizations that once thrived. And they challenge our belief in permanence. If you could walk one of these ghost roads today, where do you think it would lead you? From the air, you start to see it. A straight line across a field where the wheat grows a little shorter, or in a jungle, a faint shape under the canopy. These are ghost roads. They're not just old or abandoned. They're clues. Something was erased. The reason they were built, that logic, it's gone. Taken by the wind, the water, the earth moving. To see these old networks, you need new tools. Archaeology isn't just shovels now. There's a technology, LIDAR, lasers from planes. They can peel back the trees and show you the shape of the ground underneath. You see a low ridge where a causeway is buried, a shallow ditch next to a path no one remembers, and the soil itself, it holds the memory. It's compacted from feet walking for thousands of years. It has a chemical trace from the animals that traveled there. These tools map a landscape that's invisible. That's the important difference. A Roman road that became a modern highway. That story never stopped. Its purpose is still there, but a ghost road, its purpose is gone. It was built for a port that's underwater now. It was made to go around a marsh that dried up centuries ago. It was engineered for a river that isn't there anymore. The road stays. It's a perfect answer to a question the earth answered differently. To walk it now is strange. You're following directions for a world that disappeared. The landscape is the key. The code is there, waiting. What would it take for the road you drive every day to become a mystery like that? The Sahara has something hidden under all that sand. It wasn't always a desert. For a very long time it was green, a savanna with lakes and rivers that flowed. Early herding communities lived there, moving with the seasonal rains, following the animals. They made the first paths across the Sahara. These weren't built roads. They were just corridors of movement, worn into a landscape that could support life. And then everything changed. That started about 5,000 years ago. The climate shifted. The monsoon rains that used to reach the interior, they began to fail. They were pulled away by changes in the Earth's tilt, its orbit. Scientists call this orbital forcing, and it slowly changed the water across the continent. The lakes dried up, the rivers shrank to nothing, the savanna grasses died. And the desert, the one we see now, started to advance. So it's not just a road being buried by sand. It's the reason for the road drying up, blowing away. The destinations vanished, the watering holes, the grazing lands that made the route possible gone. What's left are ghosts in the ground, fossil river channels. The outlines of old lakes you can only see from space. Those are the clues, hints to paths that actually went somewhere. Trying to find a road when its whole world has been erased, that's the real puzzle. You're not looking for stones, you're looking for the memory of water, in a place that doesn't remember rain anymore. The story of water leaving the Sahara. That's one kind of disappearance, but a road can lose its purpose another way, when the land itself moves. So we go to the first network, the Persian Royal Road. Built by the Achaemenid Empire about 2,500 years ago, it was a logistical marvel, over 1,600 miles long, connecting Susa, the capital, all the way to Sardis out in western Anatolia. Imperial messengers could cover that whole distance in 7 days. That speed was the empire's nervous system. But if you look at the western end in what's now Turkey, the logic starts to fray. The road was engineered for the landscape of its time. In western Anatolia, it followed the fertile coastal plains. It skirted the Aegean Sea to link the major port cities. These cities were the empire's gateways. Their harbors were deep, their quays were busy. The road was built for that reality, but the landscape had other plans. This region is seismically active, one of the most active on Earth. Earthquakes routinely reshape the coast, and then there were the rivers, most famously, the one the Greeks called the meander. Its name became a verb for a reason. It didn't just flow to the sea, it twisted and turned. It deposited immense amounts of silt at its mouth, year after year. Century after century, this process is siltation, a slow, relentless force. It doesn't destroy a coastline, it pushes it outward. It fills in bays and harbors with land. And this is where the case study becomes clear. The ancient city of Ephesus. In its heyday, Ephesus was a dazzling metropolis. Its wealth was built on a magnificent harbor. A harbor that opened directly to the Aegean. The royal road would have approached Ephesus as a supreme destination. Its final stretches designed to deliver travelers and goods straight to that thriving port. Today, you visit the ruins of Ephesus. You stand in an archaeological site that's miles from the sea. The great harbor is gone. In its place are fields. The silting from the Meander River, combined with seismic shifts, gradually filled the bay. The city's lifeblood, its connection to the world, slowly choked on silt. So what became of the road, the paved stones that once led to dockside warehouses, to ships being loaded, now lead nowhere. They terminate in quiet farmland. The road didn't crumble, it was stranded. Its entire reason for being in that specific alignment was anchored to a coastline that walked away, meter by meter, over centuries. The Persian Empire fell, but the road's obsolescence here was guaranteed long before. By geology, it became a solution in search of a problem, a highway waiting for a port that no longer existed. This is the quiet fate of so many ancient networks. They aren't just overcome by politics or war, they are patiently made irrelevant by the Earth's own breathing. The next time you see a road that ends abruptly in a field, ask yourself, what was it heading toward that isn't there anymore? The Persian roads waited for a sea that never came back. But a landscape can change in one day. Over 3,500 years ago on Crete, there was a civilization that built roads for peace, the Minoans. They weren't warriors, they were traders, artists, administrators. Their world was a network of palaces, Knossos with its labyrinth, Phaistos overlooking the plain. And they connected these centers with paved roads. This was the Bronze Age. These weren't dirt tracks, they were engineered corridors wide enough for carts. Stone pavements, drainage ditches, bridges. They were the circulatory system of a centralized society. Goods moved from harbor to palace, from farm to storage. That efficiency was their wealth. The roads were laid out for the Crete they knew, a stable island, prosperous, at the heart of Aegean trade. But to the north, about 70 miles across the water, slept a giant. The volcano on Thera, what we call Santorini, its eruption in the 16th century BCE, was one of the most violent in human history. It wasn't just an explosion. It was a world ending. It likely triggered colossal tsunamis. Those would have smashed into the northern coast of Crete, devastating the ports, the coastal settlements. Then came the ash, a blanket of fine, abrasive particles, falling for days, maybe weeks. It smothered fields, poisoned water, made the air difficult to breathe. This wasn't a local disaster, it was a global climate event. Tree rings, ice cores from as far as Ireland and California show the evidence. A volcanic winter followed. Years of cooler temperatures, failed harvests. For the Minoans, the landscape turned hostile. The agricultural base that fed the palaces collapsed. The trade networks dependent on those ruined harbors shattered. The political authority of the central palaces crumbled. They couldn't provide in the crisis, and the elegant, paved roads, physically, many survived. The stones stayed in place, but they became pathways to nowhere. They led to palaces that were being abandoned, to storehouses that were empty, to a way of life that had vanished almost overnight. The network became obsolete not because it was destroyed, but because the entire purpose for its existence was gone. The society that designed it, that needed it, was gone. The roads were a perfect answer to a question the volcano erased. Walking one of those Minoan causeways today is different from walking a Roman road. You're not following a route that was later reused. You're tracing the skeleton of a civilization that simply stopped. Its highways left intact, monuments to a stability that proved to be an illusion. What does it mean to build for permanence when the ground can rewrite the rules in a matter of hours? This leads to a different kind of vanishing, not from cataclysm. From a slow, patient hunger, the Qhapaq, the royal road of the Inca. It was a stone spine for an empire running from Colombia down to Chile, and it crossed some of the most extreme terrain on Earth. The highest parts were built for rock and for ice. The builders didn't see glaciers as obstacles. They saw them as permanent, as reliable as the mountain itself. They routed roads across glacial passes. They built way stations called tambos right in the shadow of ice fields. The logic was clear. In their world, the ice was a constant. A cold, firm foundation. Then, after the empire fell, that ice did something. It acted as a preservative. Sections of the road, artifacts at the tambos, they were swallowed by advancing ice. Frozen, it created a kind of ghost road, not lost to sand but kept in frozen storage. Now that storage is melting, climate change is retreating the glaciers. And as the ice pulls back, it's revealing these buried sections. Archaeologists are finding pavement so perfect it looks like the builders just left. They find remnants at the tambos, clues to the lives of the people who worked up there. The story is layered. The Inca built for a cold, stable world. That cold preserved their work as a time capsule. And now, a warming they couldn't have imagined is unlocking it. We're discovering their world because our world is changing in a way they'd never foresee. It's a cycle. Their infrastructure relied on the permanence of ice. Our era is defined by its disappearance. So what we're seeing isn't just a road, it's a contract with the environment broken. Their fundamental assumption that the mountain's white crown would always be there proving false over centuries. To walk one of these paths now is to walk a line between two worlds. The world that built it and the world that is uneasily uncovering it. And it makes you wonder about our own foundations. What seemingly permanent features do we build on today that might prove one day to have been only temporary? That slow, patient hunger, that's the desert's way. It doesn't erupt, it doesn't shake, it just drinks. And for a road, thirst is the real enemy. The Silk Road wasn't a single line on a map. It was a living web of choices, 1,000 decisions made by caravan masters under that brutal sun. Their map wasn't drawn in ink, it was written in water. Every route through the Taklamakan Desert or the Kizilkum was a fragile chain, one oasis to the next, just close enough that a loaded camel could make it before the water skins ran dry. The cities that grew at these watering holes were miracles of logistics. Lulan, Nia, they weren't just stops, they were civilizations built on one precious idea that the water would always be there. The roads approached them as lifelines, the paving, the waymarkers, all engineered for that final, desperate push toward the city gates, toward the wells. But an oasis is a contract between a river and the ground, and contracts can be broken. Sometimes the river itself would shift. An earthquake upstream, a landslide, could send it on a new course. Leaving a town high and dry, more often it was a slower unraveling. The very success of these cities planted the seeds of their end. More people meant more fields to irrigate. More canals dug, more water drawn from the underground aquifers. It was a slow, steady overdraft. The water table would drop, the springs would weaken. The trees that held the dunes at bay would start to die. And then, one season, the central well would come up salty, or not at all. The decision to leave wasn't a dramatic one. It was a series of quiet, terrible realizations. The road that once brought wealth now brought only dust. The last caravan would depart, and no one would follow its tracks back. The wind would do the rest. Within a generation, the dunes would be climbing the abandoned city walls. The road leading into town, once worn deep by countless feet, would be buried. It became a trap, a path that promised salvation but led only to a buried city and a dry well. From space, the story is written in the sand. Satellite imagery shows the ghost roads of the Silk Road. You see a pale line, a spectral track, emerging from the dunes. It runs straight and true with the purpose of a modern highway, and then it just stops. In the middle of nothing, it connects to no city, no ruin. It just vanishes into the blankness of the desert. That line is the fossil of a hope. It's the exact route a caravan master would have taken, aiming for a well that no longer existed. Those images are maybe the purest example of a road network designed for a landscape that simply withdrew its support. The desert didn't destroy the road. It made the road's purpose a mirage. You can almost hear the silence that followed the last set of footsteps, a path waiting for travelers who would never come again. The desert can erase roads with thirst, but water can also preserve. It preserves by hiding. To see the deepest layers of this, you have to go north to a different sea. The Roman roads in Britannia are legendary, straight lines, engineered marvels that conquered the British landscape. Watling Street, Fosse Way, they're the bones of Roman Britain. You can still see them, but they were built on a land with a secret, a memory of a world that was already ancient when the legions got there, beneath the North Sea. Between eastern England and the Netherlands, there's a lost continent, not a myth, a real place. Archaeologists call it Doggerland. 8,000 years ago, that wasn't sea. It was land, a vast fertile plain with hills, forests, rivers, marshes. It connected Britain directly to Europe. This was the world of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. People who followed reindeer and aurochs, who fished in the rivers, who moved with the seasons. Their lives were woven into that landscape and their paths. The corridors they wore through the forests and across the river valleys, those were the first true roads of that region, roads for a world of mammoths and wild horses. Then the ice kept melting. From the last glacial period, sea levels began to rise slowly, relentlessly. It took millennia. The rising water didn't just flood a coast. It crept inland. It swallowed the low-lying plains. It turned river valleys into estuaries, then into bays. It isolated hills, turned them into islands, then drowned them completely. The people of Doggerland would have seen this over generations. They retreated to higher ground. They watched hunting grounds vanish. They saw their social networks stretch, then sever from the encroaching water. The final chapter might have been a catastrophe. Evidence suggests a massive underwater landslide. Off the coast of Norway, around 6,200 BCE, it triggered a tsunami that would have swept across the remaining lands, so Doggerland was lost. By slow encroachment or sudden disaster, completely submerged. By the time the Romans built their first road in Britain, Doggerland had been under the sea for over 5,000 years. So those Roman roads, for all their engineering, they were built on the shoreline of a forgotten world, the routes of the Mesolithic people, the original pathways. They lie 60, 100, 150 feet below the North Sea. Fishermen have dragged up their tools for centuries, barbed points made of antler. Stone axes. Scientists mapping the seafloor with sonar can see the ghostly outlines of its sunken rivers, like the Channel River, wider than the Rhine. This changes the scale of the story, a road network designed for a landscape that has since changed. It isn't just about empires and their fallen highways. It predates civilization itself. It's a human constant, the hunter following a game trail across a plain that would become seabed. He was making the same calculation as the Inca engineer plotting a course across a glacier. They were building their lives on a map they believed was fixed. The earth had other plans. These are the ultimate ghost roads, not buried under sand. Entombed under cold, dark water, they're not just abandoned, they're in a realm we cannot walk. Their entire purpose to connect hunting grounds to link seasonal camps. To move across a living plain, it was rendered obsolete not by politics or economics, by planetary geology. The rising water didn't cover a road, it covered the very idea of the road. The need for it, the world it served. So when you stand on the coast of East Anglia or look at a map of Roman Britain, you're only seeing the latest chapter. Beneath your feet and far out to sea, there's a much older network, a labyrinth of choices and paths made by people whose names we'll never know, forever silent under the waves. It's a humbling reminder, the landscapes we take for granted are temporary, and the paths we carve into them, however permanent they feel, they're just whispers. Against the tide of deep time, the water that drowned Doggerland was relentless, but a landscape can also fail from within. The ground can just give way. That brings us to the sixth network, the Mayan Sacbeob. In the dense, green world of the Yucatan, the Maya didn't just cut paths, they built monuments to connection. These were raised causeways paved in white, sometimes just a few feet wide, sometimes broad avenues. They ran straight as arrows through the rainforest. Connecting city to city, ceremonial center to outlying community. To walk on one was to leave the chaotic jungle. You entered a realm of pure, engineered order. They were built on faith and practicality. Faith in the cosmic order their cities represented. Practicality in moving people, goods, ideas across a difficult terrain. But that terrain had a hidden vulnerability. The Yucatan is a karst landscape. The bedrock is limestone. It's a soft stone that water dissolves. Over eons, rainwater, slightly acidic from the air, has eaten away at it. This creates a world of sinkholes, they're called cenotes, and vast underground rivers. There's very little surface water. The land is like a sponge. It drinks rain almost instantly, storing it in caverns below. The Maya mastered this hidden hydrology. Their cities were positioned around cenotes, their agriculture adapted to the thin soil. The Sacbeob were engineered for this specific, delicate skin of earth, a skin atop a hollowed-out foundation. They were a triumph, but then the climate shifted. Around the 9th century, the region was hit by a series of droughts, prolonged, severe. The rains failed season after season. The consequences for a karst landscape are profound. Without rainwater replenishing it, the water table begins to drop. The underground caverns and rivers start to empty. The soil, already thin, loses moisture. It begins to blow away or wash off in rare, violent storms, and the land itself, deprived of the buoyant support of groundwater, can become unstable. Sinkholes can open more frequently. The very ground the Sacbeob were built upon could have begun to subtly shift or crack or subside, but the more devastating change was above. As the droughts persisted, the agricultural systems that supported the great cities failed. The population faced immense hardship. The social and political order centered on those cities began to unravel. People left, they migrated to areas with more reliable water. This is where the fate of the Sacbeob becomes hauntingly symbolic. A Sacbe leading from a smaller town might have terminated at a great city. Like Qhapaq, but as the droughts worsened, Qhapaq itself went into decline. Its reservoirs dried up, its people dispersed, so that beautifully engineered white road, that sacred path, no longer led to a thriving metropolis. It led to an emptying one, and then, eventually, to an abandoned one. The road didn't collapse, its purpose did. It became a pathway from a living community to a memorial. A memorial of what had been lost. The jungle, always waiting at the edges, began its reclamation. Roots pried at the stone paving, vines draped over the white plaster. The Sacbeob didn't vanish, they were swallowed. They became ghosts in the green, their straight lines a stark geometry against the chaos of the forest. Marking a route to a destination that no longer existed, the Maya built for a world of predictable water cycles, a world atop a sponge-like foundation. When the water withdrew, both the society and the stability of the land itself were undermined. Their roads remain as silent, raised questions. What does it mean to build a straight line to a future your world can no longer sustain? The Maya had those straight white roads, and then the jungle just took them back. But the desert, it's different. The desert doesn't wait, it moves. Frankincense. Myrrh. In the ancient world, these weren't just scents. They were something like divine currency, worth as much as gold, and they came from one place, the remote valleys of southern Arabia. Getting them to Egypt, to Rome, meant crossing an impossible sea, a sea of sand, the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. That was the domain of the Incense route. It wasn't a single paved highway, it was a masterpiece of memory, a network of choices passed down through generations of caravan masters. Their map wasn't drawn on paper. It was written in the shapes of the dunes, in the taste of the wind, in the location of wells so scarce knowing them was a form of power. The route was a precise dance. It navigated between these massive, star-shaped dunes. It clung to the harder gravel plains where the footing was firm. It aimed for oases that were just damp spots in the earth, maybe marked by a lonely cluster of palm trees. The entire economy was built for this specific, brutal landscape. Way stations were placed where the water was. Distances between stops were calculated to the last drop in a water skin. The paths weren't arbitrary. They were the only possible lines through a shifting maze. But a dune isn't a mountain. It's a temporary hill. The empty quarter is one of the most active dune fields on Earth. The winds there have a pattern, a rhythm. Over centuries, those winds push the sand. Dunes migrate. They can move dozens of feet in a year. So a dune that sheltered a way station for 100 years might, in another 100, march right over it. It might block a narrow pass between two other dunes, turning a known corridor into a dead end. The wells were just as vulnerable. In a landscape of constant motion, silt is everywhere. A well carefully dug could fill in from a single major storm, or the aquifer feeding it could slowly drain or shift its course underground. A well that was life itself for 3 centuries could become a dry, sandy pit. And with it, the reason for a way station, for that particular fork in the route, would vanish. So the route didn't just fade when sea trade became easier. Its physical reality became more hostile. The puzzle changed. The path that worked for your grandfather might now lead into the heart of a dune sea with no exit. The well your great-uncle relied on might be buried under 50 feet of sand. The knowledge of the old masters became a legend, then a rumor. The landscape they mastered had reconfigured itself. Today, satellite images show the ghost of the Incense route. You can sometimes see a faint, darker line across the tan expanse. It's the ghost of compacted sand from countless camel trains. And you can see where it simply stops or winds aimlessly. It doesn't lead to a buried city. It leads to a dune that wasn't there before. The route was designed for a sandscape in one particular arrangement. When the arrangement changed, the design became a fossil, a set of directions for a desert that no longer existed. The sand didn't erase the road. It made the road's intelligence obsolete. A caravan following the old wisdom wouldn't find wealth. It would find a thirsty end. the desert solved the puzzle of the incense route by quietly, grain by grain, changing all the pieces. The sand of Arabia moves slowly, water can reshape things much faster, and no river reshapes like the Mississippi. Its name means great river, but it's really a restless giant. People here understood that long before Europeans arrived, the Mississippian culture from about 800 to 1500 CE built with earth. Their cities had these huge platform mounds at the center. Cahokia near St. Louis was one. From these centers, trade and communication spread out. They didn't have paved roads like the Romans. Their paths were earthen, worn by feet along ridges through cane forests across the bottomlands. This was the eighth network. A land-based map made for a water titan. It all came down to the river's behavior. The Mississippi doesn't just flood, it builds the land itself. Over thousands of years, silt from floods creates natural high banks. These are levees. They become the high ground, the safe routes for travel, the best spots for towns. Between them, the river forms oxbow lakes, crescent-shaped water that used to be the main channel. The whole valley is a fabric of these features, always changing, so the Mississippian paths weren't random. They followed those natural levees, the dry spines above the swamp. They connected mound centers built on bluffs or on stable parts of a levee. The network was an adaptation to a system that was dynamic but predictable. But the Mississippi has another trick, more dramatic. It's called avulsion. That's when the river, choked with its own sediment, abandons its course. It finds a steeper, shorter path to the sea. It can happen in a catastrophic flood. The river breaks through its levee somewhere new, and the water volume cuts a whole new channel. The old riverbed is left behind, a silent bayou. Think about a community. Its mound built on a high levee overlooking a flowing river. Its paths connect to other towns upstream and down. Then, 100 miles south, an avulsion happens. The river jumps its banks. It starts flowing along a new course miles away for that town. The change isn't instant, but the consequences spread. The river that was their highway, their water source, their connection to the world becomes a dwindling stream. The channel fills with silt. The fish leave. Trade canoes can't get there anymore. The land paths now lead to a bank overlooking a quiet, mosquito-filled backwater. The whole reason for the settlement's location is gone. It was built for a river that walked away. The pathways themselves, those routes along the levee, might now end at a sheer bank dropping into empty air. Where the river used to be, or they might be blocked by the river's new channel cutting across what was once dry land. The network isn't destroyed, it's disconnected. Made irrelevant by a geography that decided to start over. Today, from the air, you can see the ghosts of the old channels. They snake across the land like pale scars. And on archaeological maps, you find Mississippian sites. They're perched not on the modern river, but on the banks of these ancient, abandoned channels. Their roads, invisible now under fields or woods, once pointed toward a flowing giant that just left them behind. It's a lesson in building on a foundation of liquid time. You can learn the river's seasonal rhythm, but how do you plan for the day the river decides to change the dance? A river can leave a city behind, but a civilization can also eat away at the ground beneath it. There was the kingdom of Aksum, in the highlands of what's now Ethiopia and Eritrea. It was a giant of its era, from about the 1st century to the 8th century CE. It held the trade routes between the African interior and everywhere else. Its coins turned up from Rome to India. Its capital had these huge stone obelisks. And its lifeblood was a road, a network that ran from the inland capital down to the Red Sea port of Adulis. This was the 9th network, an imperial highway built for a particular kind of world. The roads went through highlands that were, back then, green and full of forest, and these forests weren't just scenery, they had a job. They held the steep slopes in place. Their roots kept the soil locked down against the heavy seasonal rains. The canopy managed the moisture. It created a cooler, more temperate pocket of climate. The roads were built for that environment. They followed the ridges where the ground was solid. They used switchbacks to handle the incline. They were engineered for a wooded mountain. But Aksum's success started to change that world. To build those huge monuments, its palaces, it needed timber, a tremendous amount. To feed more people, it cleared forest for terraced fields. To power the forges and kilns of a wealthy society, it needed wood. Over centuries, the deforestation spread. It was a slow change. A forest doesn't disappear in a year. It recedes over generations. The consequences were in the earth. Without that web of roots, the rich topsoil on the steep slopes had nothing to grip it. When the rains came, the water ran off faster, taking the soil with it. That's erosion. It wasn't just dirt washing away, it was fertility. The land's own productivity began to drain downhill. And the climate of the highlands started to shift. Without the forests to cycle the moisture, the region got drier. The microclimate changed. The rains, when they came, were more likely to be violent downpours. The gentle, sustained soak of a forested watershed was gone. Now think about that engineered road, cut into a mountainside, designed for the water cycle of a forested world. As the landscape grew more arid and bare, the rain changed. Instead of being absorbed, it sheeted off the hard ground. It gathered force. It became flash floods. Whole sections of road could be washed away. Gullies could cut across the pathways. More subtly, the passes, the low points between mountains that the roads went through, they could become dangerous. A pass that was once a dry corridor might turn into a channel for seasonal floodwaters, or the loss of plants could expose it to landslides. The road network, that vital link between the capital and the sea, began to suffer. A death by 1,000 cuts. Maintaining it became a constant fight against a landscape growing more hostile. The very act of sustaining the empire's grandeur was making the empire's infrastructure harder to sustain. This wasn't the only reason Aksum declined, but it was a major stress. As trade got harder, as farm yields likely suffered, the kingdom's power faded. The great port of Adulis eventually silted up and was left behind. The roads that led to it, once full of the wealth of continents, went quiet. They weren't buried by sand or water. They were undermined by a changing ecology. The kingdom built a road for a forested highland, and then, through the demands of its own prosperity, it helped turn that highland into something else. The road stayed, a monument to a route that made sense in a world that wasn't there anymore. How do you maintain a highway when the landscape it crosses is slowly, steadily, being washed out from under you? A forest can disappear over generations. A cliff can collapse in an instant. In central China, where the Qinling and Daba mountains rise like a wall, ancient engineers confronted a vertical world. Their answer was a road that defied gravity, the Shudao, the road to Shu. This was the 10th network, a system of wooden galleries, plank walkways and tunnels, bolted and pegged right onto the cliff faces. A breathtaking act of will to connect the isolated Sichuan basin with the political center of China. The engineering was precise. They cut horizontal notches into the living rock, drove wooden beams into those notches, then laid planks across the beams, creating a suspended walkway. In some sections, they carved tunnels straight through the mountain. This whole system was built on one assumption, that the mountain was a reliable partner, that the cliff face holding the road would hold, that the rock would stay. But this region sits on some of the most restless geology on Earth, a landscape born from colliding tectonic plates. It's prone to catastrophic earthquakes. And with those quakes come landslides of unimaginable scale. A single major tremor could do more than shake planks loose. It could trigger a slope collapse that sheared off an entire cliff face. The very wall holding the road's notches and beams could just cease to exist, slump into the river valley below in a roar of dust and stone. In that moment, miles of painstaking engineering were gone. Not buried, erased, the earthquake could also permanently change the topography. A narrow pass choked with rubble, a stable slope turned into a precarious scree field. A river diverted by a landslide, now running directly against a remaining cliff, undermining it with every flood. The road was built for a specific, static map of rock. The earthquake redrew the map. After such an event, maintenance wasn't just difficult, it was often impossible. How do you rebuild a plank road when the cliff you built it on is now a pile of boulders at the bottom of a gorge? The original route, with its careful calculations for grade and stability, was now nonsense, so the builders or their descendants would have to find a new line. Cut new notches in a new cliff, maybe higher or lower than before. The old road was abandoned. Its only remains might be a line of empty notches in a rock wall. A ghost of a path leading to a drop-off. Walking the remnants of the Shudao today, you see these silent testaments, a row of square holes cut into a cliff with no beams left. A tunnel mouth that opens onto open air because the mountainside beyond it fell away. These aren't just ruins, they're a record of a conversation, a dialogue between human ingenuity and a mountain that kept changing its mind. The engineers spoke in wood and iron, in geometry and persistence. The mountain replied in seismic shudders and falling rock. The road was a question asked of the landscape. And sometimes the landscape's answer was to remove the question entirely, to build a road on a foundation that can choose at any moment to simply walk away. The mountain answered with rockfalls and with silence, but some landscapes change with a patience so deep it feels like stillness. In the far north, the Vikings mastered a world of water. Their longships were famous on the open sea, but their real genius was inland. They worked on a simple, brutal logic. If a river got too shallow, or if there was a shortcut between two waterways, they didn't turn back. They got out, they carried the boat. That practice was portage, and the routes they used, worn by generations of feet dragging hulls over soil and rock, those routes formed an 11th network. A secret map written not on land but in the spaces between waters. These portage routes were precise. In Scandinavia, in Scotland, on the islands, specific strips of land became known. A quarter-mile trek across a narrow isthmus could save days of sailing around a peninsula. A half-day haul over a low ridge could connect two river systems. It could open a continent's interior. Choosing where to portage was deep local knowledge. It needed a flat, firm approach from the water on both sides. It needed a gradient shallow enough to drag a heavy boat. It demanded that both bodies of water, the one you left and the one you aimed for, were deep enough. Deep enough to float your vessel right at that spot. This whole system was built on a snapshot of the Earth's posture, and that snapshot was already changing. 20,000 years ago, much of this region was under ice sheets miles thick. The weight of that ice pressed the land down into the mantle, like a finger pressing into soft clay. When the ice melted, the land began to rise back up, slowly. This is isostatic rebound. The land is still rising today, at about the speed your fingernails grow. The effects are subtle but absolute. A coastline lifts. What was a sheltered bay becomes a meadow, then a forest far from the sea. A lake's outlet rises and the lake drains. Or it shrinks, and for a Viking, most critically, the gradient of a river changes. A stretch that was once gently sloping, navigable, might become a steeper rapid as the land uplifts unevenly. Or it might become a sluggish, silt-choked trickle. Now picture a portage route from the Viking Age, around 900 CE. It connected the end of a deep fjord to the headwaters of a river leading inland. For centuries it worked. You sail into the fjord's head, beach your ship on a gentle gravel shore. You and your crew lift it, carry it for 600 paces over a smooth, mossy bank. Set it down in a placid river, you're on your way. Come back 300 years later. The rebound has lifted that entire area. The head of the fjord is no longer a deep water inlet. It's a shallow lagoon cut off from the sea by a growing gravel bar. You can't sail your ship in anymore. On the other side, the river's source has shifted. The spot where you used to launch is now a damp depression, 50 yards from the nearest flowing water. That 600-pace portage is now a useless trek. It connects a lagoon you can't reach to a river that isn't there. The route didn't disappear. The logic of the route evaporated. The landscape shifted in slow motion. It made the careful calculation of generations obsolete. What was a vital link became a path through a forest, a path leading from one puzzling dry spot to another. Today, archaeologists looking for these routes sometimes find them in seemingly illogical places. A clear, worn path leading from a field to another field. No water in sight, but geological surveys reveal the story. That field was once a lakeshore. That other field was once a riverbank. The path is a fossil. A fossil of a connection between two wet worlds that slowly dried up and moved apart. The Vikings built their mobility on an assumption of geographic stability. They read the waterways as a permanent text, but the Earth's crust was still writing its next sentence. Their portage networks are a lesson in building on a foundation that is, quite literally, still finding its level. The land rises, but it can also wither. In the southern Mediterranean, the Romans built an empire on grain. Their provinces in North Africa, what we now call Tunisia and Libya, they weren't just colonies. They were a granary, a vast open-air granary. The fertility there was legendary, fields of wheat stretching to the horizon, a climate more generous than today, more reliable. To move that grain, to feed Rome and supply the legions, required a road network of immense efficiency. This was the 12th network, Carthaginian and Roman roads from a lost agricultural world. These roads were purely functional. They ran straight from the interior farms to the coastal ports. Cities like Leptis Magna thrived as the endpoints, the terminals for these inland arteries. The roads were engineered for heavy cart traffic, for the constant, rolling movement of harvests. They were built on an assumption that the landscape they crossed would always be productive. That the soil would be deep, the pastures green, the seasonal rains dependable. But that landscape was living on borrowed time. Several forces converged. The Romans practiced intensive, large-scale agriculture. They cleared vast tracts for their big estates, their latifundia. They introduced grazing animals on a scale the native ecology wasn't prepared for. This overcultivation, this overgrazing, it stripped away the protective ground cover. The soil, once held fast by roots, became exposed, and then the climate itself began to shift. Natural cycles brought a long-term trend toward aridity. The rainfall patterns that sustained the classical fertility, they began to fail. The process is called desertification. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, relentless retreat of life. First, the deep-rooted native plants give way to hardier scrub, then the scrub thins. The soil, robbed of its structure, begins to blow away in the dry wind or wash away in the occasional, violent downpour. What was once a thick, rich loam becomes a thin, rocky crust. And the desert, always waiting at the edges, advances. Now follow one of those Roman roads, a road built at the height of Leptis Magna's power. For its first century, it ran through a tapestry of fields and olive groves. The carts were always full. Then, over the decades, the view from that road began to change. The fields looked more stressed. The green seemed to pull back from the road's edge. The scrubland grew more dominant. The road itself didn't change. It was the same solid Roman engineering, but its context was vanishing. A century later, that same road might cut through a semi-arid steppe. The farms were gone, replaced by nomadic herders moving with the scant grazing. The purpose of the road to transport bulk agricultural goods, it became almost theoretical. What was there left to transport? By the time the empire itself faded, the road ran through a landscape well on its way to becoming the desert we see today. Its stone surface might be half buried in wind-blown sand. It led to a leptis magna that was itself being buried, its harbor silting up, its reason for being forgotten. The road became a line drawn between two ruins, a fossil of an economic logic that the earth had revoked. To walk such a road now is to witness a profound disconnect. You're standing on engineering meant for plenty in the middle of austerity. The road is a skeleton. The flesh of the land it was meant to serve is gone. It speaks not just of political collapse but of ecological divorce. The Romans built for a specific, fertile North Africa. They helped, along with natural cycles, to create a different North Africa. And their magnificent roads were left behind as monuments to that transformation. They are ghosts of abundance in a world of scarcity. What does it mean when the very wealth a road was built to carry is the thing that ultimately made the road obsolete? A river can leave a city behind. It can also leave its own banks. The Ganges isn't one channel. It's a braid, a tapestry of channels and islands constantly being rewoven. For thousands of years, it's been the spine of civilization in the north, and for just as long, a major road has followed it. Long before the Grand Trunk Road, it was the Uttarapatha. The Northern Path, this was a 13th network, a river of people and goods flowing next to the river of water. The logic was simple: stay close to the Ganges. The river was your guide, your water, your spiritual heart. Settlements grew on its banks. The road connected them. It was built for a landscape defined by that one mighty presence. But the Ganges is restless, especially near the sea in the Bengal Delta. It becomes a shapeshifter. The land is flat, built from its own silt. The river, full of that sediment, always looks for the easiest path. During the monsoon floods, the power is immense. It can cut through a narrow neck of land, straighten a huge bend. That's a meander cutoff. In one season, a town on a gentle curve could find itself on an abandoned oxbow lake. The main current now runs a kilometer away. For a road built to link riverside towns, this is a fundamental problem. The Uttarapatha wasn't just a track. It had established alignments, stone bridges over tributaries, paved sections near temples, ferries at set crossings. These were fixed investments in the geography. Imagine a stretch of this road heading for a busy market town by the river. For generations, it led travelers right to the ghats, the stone steps down to the water. Then, one catastrophic flood, the Ganges shifts. It carves a new main channel 2 miles to the east. The old channel by the town slows down, it silts up. Becomes a backwater. The town's reason for being dries up with the old river. The ferries have nowhere to go. The market for goods by boat vanishes, but the old road remains. It still points at the town, at those now quiet stone steps. The destination it was made for has lost its connection to the living river. The road itself isn't washed away. It's conceptually stranded. It becomes a path to a memory, a route built for a specific relationship between land and water, a relationship the water itself has renegotiated. From the air, you can sometimes see these fossil alignments, a faint, straight track through farmland. It leads to a modest village on the bank of a surprisingly small, sleepy stream. That sleepy stream was once the main artery of the Ganges. The village was a port. The road was its lifeline to the interior. The landscape shifted, and the road's purpose was left behind. It now connects a present-day settlement to the ghost of its own past importance. The builders understood the river's power. Their network had a built-in adaptability. Alternative routes for floods, but some changes were too permanent. A road could be rebuilt, a bridge could be moved, but you couldn't move a city. So the ancient road network holds these moments of divorce in its bones. It shows a dialogue between permanent human settlement and a fundamentally impermanent river. The road was an attempt to pin down the landscape. The river was a reminder that the landscape was always in motion. The river's restlessness is a force of nature, but sometimes the biggest obstacle is a story you tell yourself. In the 19th century, the pioneers heading west carried a map in their minds. And that map was wrong. They called it the Great American Desert, this sea of grass, the Great Plains. It wasn't a place to live, it was a barrier, an emptiness you just had to get through. The Oregon Trail, that whole network, was engineered for that idea. It was a corridor for survival, plotted with one goal: to cross that desert as fast as you could. Every decision on that 2,000-mile journey was a calculation of scarcity. The route clung to rivers, like the Platte, where the water was muddy, but it was there. It aimed for landmarks: Independence Rock, Chimney Rock, not as destinations but as proof you were still on the only viable line across the void. Those deep ruts carved by wagon wheels weren't just a path, they were a consensus, a collective agreement that this specific line, and only this line, gave you the slimmest margin between life and a thirsty death on the prairie. The landscape they crossed was, in their eyes, static, hostile, a given, a fact as hard as the ground, but that fact was an illusion. The desert wasn't barren. It was a different kind of fertile. There was deep, rich soil under the grass, held in place by a mat of roots that had grown for millennia. The obstacle wasn't the land. It was the technology to unlock it, the vision to see its potential. The transformation came with the steel plow, to cut the sod, and later, deep well drilling. Suddenly, that endless, threatening expanse could be divided into farms. The very desert became the nation's breadbasket. The psychological map was redrawn. The landscape was redefined, physically and conceptually. What was once a terrifying passage became a place to put down roots. So today, when you see the preserved ruts of the Oregon Trail, winding through a field of Nebraska corn or Wyoming sage, you're not just looking at an old road. You're looking at the fossil of a fear. Those ruts mark a route designed for a landscape of hardship, a landscape that existed more in the mind than in the earth. They're a ghost road of a different kind, a path made obsolete not by the land changing, but by our understanding of the land changing. Completely, the trail didn't vanish. The necessity for its particular, desperate logic just evaporated. It stands now as a monument to a time when we saw a wall, and only later learned it was a door. Fear can change a map, memory can keep one. The 15th network isn't stone, it's sound. The Aboriginal songlines in Australia, they're not just stories. They're sung maps of the whole continent. A songline ties navigation, law, history, identity, all into one melody. Knowing the song means knowing the land. Every rock, every waterhole, every pass is a note in a score you can walk. The paths are precise. They're practical routes for survival, for ceremony, across huge and varied ground. This network was made for an older Australia, an Australia that looked different. At the last Ice Age peak, sea levels were lower. Much of what's now ocean floor was dry. Coastal plains, river valleys, forests. This exposed shelf-connected islands to the mainland, a geography that's hard to see now, and the songlines, elders and researchers say they went across it. They didn't end at today's coast, they kept going, describing features, stories, paths that are now under the Timor Sea, the Arafura Sea, Bass Strait. That might be the deepest ghost road, a cultural and navigational network made for a landscape that vanished, not buried by sand, drowned by meltwater from a warming world. The network wasn't erased, it was translated, kept not in pavement but in oral tradition, in ceremony, in the steady memory of generations. The songs still talk about those places. They name hills that are now seamounts. They tell of river crossings where sharks are. They describe journeys that walk right off today's map and into the blue. For the cultures holding these songlines, this isn't myth. It's geology remembered as lore. It's a map of a world that was held in the one thing that could outlast the flood: human memory, community bonds. To hear a songline that crosses the drowned shelf is to listen to a coastline that's been underwater for 10,000 years. It shows a road network can exist without a single stone. Its medium is the human voice, its foundation is relationship, its endurance is a different kind of engineering, an engineering of mind and spirit fitted to a continent, even as the continent's edges were redrawn by rising seas. This network challenges what a road is. It asks what's more permanent, the stone causeway sinking under dunes, or the song that remembers the path long after the land is gone. Stone was how Egypt remembered itself. The pyramids, the temples, the statues, all that came from the east, from the dry mountains between the Nile and the Red Sea. That's where they found the perfect stone, a hard, fine-grained rock, Beacon stone. To get it out, they built the 16th network. These weren't roads for armies. Not for trade, they were roads for geology, quarry roads, engineered tracks across a brutal landscape made for one thing: to move colossal blocks from the mountain down to the river. You can still see the engineering. They carved ramps right out of the living rock at the quarry face. They laid down beds of crushed stone to make a firm surface for the sledges. They built way stations along the route, but the most important part of this network wasn't stone, it was water. The eastern desert wasn't always this dry. It had seasonal lakes, playas. They'd fill after rare rains. There were wells fed by underground aquifers. The routes for moving these huge blocks were plotted with a deep local knowledge. A knowledge of every possible water source. A team hauling a 100-ton block of granite needed water. For the workers, yes, but also to pour on the sand or clay in front of the sledge. To reduce the friction, the road was a line drawn between known points of survival. A quarry that was active for centuries, like the Beacon stone quarries at Wadi Hammamat, depended on this fragile chain. The road leading from it only worked as long as the desert's memory of water held, and that memory began to fade. Over the last 4,000 years, the climate here underwent a long, slow aridification. That trend toward dryness that affected the Sahara, it crept eastward too. The seasonal lakes became less frequent, they shrank, some stopped filling altogether. The aquifers feeding the wells weren't replenished as quickly. The water table dropped. A well that was reliable in the time of Khufu in the Old Kingdom might have turned brackish by the time of Rameses. And 1,000 years later, it might have been just a dry hole in the ground. So picture a quarry road established in the Old Kingdom. It leaves the quarry, follows a wadi, turns at a specific hill to aim for a known well 20 miles away. For generations it works. Then, century by century, the desert tightens its grip. The well's output dwindles. The seasonal lake at the next waypoint appears less often. Its bed is cracked and dry for years at a stretch. The margin for error on this already perilous journey, it vanishes. What was a difficult but calculated operation becomes a gamble with life. The stone in the mountain didn't run out. The road to the stone did. Its logic was based on a hydrological map that was slowly being erased. The road itself, the prepared bed, the cleared path, might remain perfectly intact. But it became a pathway into a trap, a route that promised water where there was none. It was abandoned not for lack of purpose, but because the landscape withdrew the permission it had once granted. Today, archaeologists find these roads. They trace them from silent quarries that still hold half-carved obelisks out into the empty desert. And they often find them ending not at the Nile, but at a place that makes no sense, a dry basin, a barren stretch of wadi, because the destination wasn't a city. It was a water source, and when that source died, the road's reason for being in that exact alignment died with it. These quarry roads are a stark equation. They measure the distance between human ambition and environmental consent. The Egyptians built for eternity in stone, but their supply lines were built on something much more fleeting. The desert's occasional kindness. The Khmer at Anchor built a machine of water and stone. Their empire was a hydraulic city, an engineered landscape to capture the monsoon, to store it and release it on a schedule. And across that managed world, they laid down a road network, royal roads made of packed earth and laterite connecting the capital to the provinces. But these roads weren't separate. They were threads woven into a fabric of canals and reservoirs. They crossed causeways over floodplains that were also managed. They were designed for a created rhythm, a predictable cycle of wet and dry, orchestrated by the Khmer. So a road from Anchor to a place like Beng Melia wasn't just a path. It was a component. It assumed the land around it would behave a certain way. The system's genius was its vulnerability. The massive reservoirs, the barrays, the canals, they needed constant, skilled maintenance. Dredging, reinforcing earthworks, preserving the forest in the watershed to keep silt out. It was a high-wire act, and for centuries they performed it. Then the balance was lost. Research points to a 1-2 punch. First, intense monsoons, possibly linked to a warmer climate period, rainfall beyond what the system was built for. The reservoirs overflowed, canals became torrents, the managed waterways burst, flooding fields. Then came drought, likely the parched earth, stripped by the floods and by the city's demand for resources, couldn't hold the soil. So when the rains returned, they brought catastrophic erosion. Silt poured into the canals. It choked the barrays. Now see it from the road, a royal highway on a raised embankment between two irrigation canals. During the crisis, one canal breaches. The floodwater cuts into the road's foundation. A huge section washes away, leaving a ravine. Further on, another road is buried under feet of silt from repeated floods. The packed surface becomes a boggy track. A causeway over a floodplain now sits in a permanent, stagnant lake, its foundations softening. The roads didn't just get wet. They were conceptually dismantled. Their design relied on a stable water table and firm earthworks. When the hydrological machine broke, the landscape they were fitted to dissolve into a new, chaotic state. Too much water in the wrong places or not enough in the right ones. Maintaining the roads became impossible because you'd have to rebuild the entire water system first. So the network didn't fade from disuse. It was actively unraveled by the very element it was built to harness. The royal roads became stranded infrastructure. They led from a capital struggling with its own environment to provinces it could no longer reach. The paths remained, but the logic of their placement, that careful integration with a functioning hydraulic grid, was gone. They became ghosts in a different way, not buried by jungle but defeated by the loss of a rhythm. The precise, managed pulse of water fell into a hythmia. And the roads, like the empire, slowly fell silent. The steppe was this ocean of grass, and its currents were horses. From Mongolia all the way to Hungary, that was the 18th network. Not a road made of stone, but a corridor of movement. 1,000 invisible tracks worn down by herds, by clans on the move, by the messengers of empires. The logic was in the seasons. Routes followed the spring melt up to the high pastures. They traced rivers that were really just strings of oases. They slipped through mountain passes, gates between the basins. This landscape built the Mongols, the Huns, the Scythians. Its openness was the highway. You could ride for weeks and see nothing but the horizon under a limitless sky. The grass sea, and on that sea, the Mongols perfected a system of speed. The Yam, a relay of riders and way stations, spaced a day's hard ride apart. A messenger could get word from Karakoram to the Danube in weeks. The system's genius was its total reliance on the steppe. It needed endless, open vistas to spot riders. It needed reliable grazing at every station for the fresh horses. It needed the ground to be firm, open, predictable. The steppe provided that, a landscape engineered for mobility, but a sea, even of grass, can be drained. The success of the nomadic empires with their vast herds started a slow change. Overgrazing is a subtle thief. When too many animals strip the land year after year, the deep-rooted grasses die back. They're replaced by shallow plants or just bare soil. The land loses its cohesion, then the wind takes over. In the drier regions, that's the start of desertification. The edges of the grass sea begin to turn to dust. Then came a more deliberate change. The plow, settled societies looked at the sea of grass and saw fields. From Russia to the American prairie, the great plow-up of the 19th and 20th centuries began. Wire fences cut the ancient corridors. Railways and roads laid a rigid grid over the fluid landscape. The plain was divided, parceled, owned. The grass sea was tamed, and in taming it was fragmented. The impact on those routes is profound. A yam station needed a radius of open land. It needed to see the approaching rider from miles away. It needed grazing that wasn't fenced off. Today, that same spot might be in the middle of a wheat field, or crossed by a highway, or just degraded to scrub and dust. The continuous, navigable plain that let an empire act as one nervous system, it exists now only in patches. The fabric is torn. To stand on the remaining steppe in Kazakhstan or Mongolia is to feel the ghost of that openness. You can understand how an empire could move like weather across it, but look at a satellite map and you see the truth. The green is fragmented by tan squares of farmland. The old corridors are interrupted. The routes that let whole nations migrate are now blocked by borders and agricultural frontiers. This network's obsolescence is a different kind of lesson. It wasn't drowned or buried, it was fenced and plowed under. The landscape didn't change cataclysmically, it was incrementally dismantled. Its very essence, that boundless, connective quality, was systematically removed. The road wasn't a path you could see, it was a condition of the land itself, and when that condition was altered, the road ceased to function. The most mobile empires in history were built on a foundation of ecological abundance and spatial freedom. We replaced that foundation with something else: order, ownership, production, and in the process we closed the ancient highways of the wind. The steppe got fenced in. Plowed under, those open highways were replaced by rigid lines, but sometimes a road's purpose gets defeated by the shortcut it creates. There's this narrow neck of land. Between the Peloponnese and mainland Greece, the Isthmus of Corinth, it presented a simple problem, a frustrating one. To sail from the Aegean Sea to the Adriatic, you had a 200-mile detour. Around the southern capes, a voyage of days through waters that were notoriously treacherous. The ancient Greeks were pragmatic. They came up with a radical solution. They built a road for ships, the Diolkos. This was the 19th network, a paved trackway made of limestone blocks, grooved for guidance, stretching 4 miles across the isthmus. It was a feat of engineering and brute force. Smaller vessels, they were hauled completely out of the water, placed on wheeled cradles, dragged by teams of men and animals. From one sea to the other, it was a brilliant bypass, a road that turned geography into a simple portage. But the Diolkos was built for a specific snapshot of that geography. A snapshot that was already developing. The isthmus isn't static. Rivers like the Nemea and the Rationi flow down from the highlands. They carry immense loads of silt. For millennia, this sediment has been deposited at the coasts, gradually pushing the shoreline outward, and at the same time, the whole region is tectonically active. It's experiencing subtle uplift. The combined effect is a slow-motion transformation. The land bridge itself was widening and rising, centimeter by centimeter. Century by century, this had a direct impact on the Diolkos. The trackway began at specific points on each coast, engineered for a gentle gradient from the water's edge. As silt built up, those landing points became farther from deep water. The approach grew longer, shallower, more difficult. The once efficient operation became a longer slog. More laborious through accumulating sediment, the economic logic of the shortcut began to erode as the physical challenge grew, and more critically, the very concept of the diolkos, this land bridge separating two seas, it tempted a grander idea. For centuries, rulers dreamed of cutting a canal through the isthmus. Julius Caesar, Caligula. The diolkos proved the value of the connection, but it also highlighted the limitation of a portage. The road was a workaround, the dream was a direct link. That dream was finally realized in the 1890s with the opening of the Corinth Canal. A deep, vertical gash through the rock, creating the maritime shortcut the diolkos had always implied, and here lies the final irony of this ghost road. The modern canal did not follow the ancient diolkos' path. Geological surveys chose a more stable, direct line, so the diolkos today lies abandoned, partially buried. Running on a parallel but separate course to the canal that made it obsolete, its stone grooves are silent. It's a road that succeeded so well it inspired its own replacement. And then was left behind by the changing land and by the very ambition it represented. It stands as a monument to an interim technology, a brilliant answer that was ultimately superseded. When the landscape's slow changes finally met human will on a massive scale, what does it mean when the proof of concept for a grand idea becomes a fossil? Sitting beside the idea's final, triumphant form, water was the first highway. In that flat land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Sumerians didn't fight the rivers. They invited them in. They built a whole labyrinth of canals, a second artificial river system, and alongside every canal they built a road not for chariots. For shoulders, for hooves, these were the towpaths, elevated banks of packed earth. They were the pulling lanes. A man or an ox would walk that path, a rope tied to a barge. Grain, pottery, stone. The road and the waterway were one system. The path existed because the canal did. Its purpose was written in the wet line beside it. This was a landscape of absolute human design. The canals brought life. They watered the fields. They were the streets of the city. The larger ones were highways between city-states. The towpath was the sidewalk. It was a perfect fit for a managed, aquatic world. It assumed the water would always be there, flowing at a certain level. Maintained, but a canal is a living thing. It needs care. It needs to be dredged, cleared of the silt the river brings as a gift, and the rivers themselves, they are not obedient. The Euphrates is a wanderer. Over centuries, its main channel can shift. It might decide to flow miles to the east. A catastrophic flood could carve a new course. And then the intake for a major canal system could be left sucking at a mudflat. The water source for 100 miles of channels just turned off. There was another, slower enemy. Salinity. In that heat, water evaporates quickly from the fields. It leaves behind dissolved salts. With constant irrigation and poor drainage, those salts accumulate. In the soil, over generations, they reach a point where the land becomes toxic. Nothing grows. The fields that fed the cities turn white and barren. When the agriculture fails, the reason to maintain the canal infrastructure fails with it. The society turns to survival, not maintenance. Now follow one of those elevated towpaths. For 300 years, it's a busy lane. The earth is packed hard by countless feet. You hear the creak of ropes, the snort of oxen, the lapping of water just below the bank. The city at the end of the canal thrives. Then the river shifts. Or the canals silt up from neglect, or the salty fields are abandoned. The water level in the canal drops. Season by season, it becomes a muddy trench. Then a damp groove, then just a linear depression in the plain. The barges stop. The pullers find other work, but the towpath remains. That elevated bank of earth, now grass-covered, stands a few feet above the flatland. It runs straight as a spear for miles. It leads from nowhere to nowhere. It is a ridge where there should be no ridge, a road that has outlived its river. Its entire design, its height, its firmness was an answer to the problem of moving boats. Without the boats, without the water, it is not a road anymore. It is the ghost of a relationship, a fossil of symbiosis. From the air, archaeologists see these ghost towpaths, faint, parallel lines across satellite images. One line is the dry ghost of the canal. The other, right beside it, is the ghost of the road. Together, they trace the geometry of a forgotten intention. They are the skeleton of a landscape that was not found but made, and then unmade. The Mesopotamian canals were building a world. The towpaths were the roads of that world. When the world's logic collapsed, the balance of water and silt and salt, the roads were left as linear monuments. They mark where the water once was. They are a reminder that the most enduring roads are sometimes not destinations. They are companions, and when what they accompany vanishes, they are left alone, speaking of a partnership with a landscape that ultimately chose to dissolve. The roads for the Moai were an act of faith. On a remote island in the Pacific, the Rapa Nui people carved these huge statues from the rock of one quarry, Rono Reraku. And they moved them for miles to the coast to stand on platforms. This was the 21st network, a ceremonial highway engineered for a specific world. The roads were prepared pathways, cleared, sometimes lined with stones, often with a sunken track. They were built across a landscape that was a subtropical forest then. A world of palms and hardwoods, that forest was the silent partner. The trees gave the material, the ropes, the wooden sledges, to move the multi-ton statues. The canopy and the roots held the island's soil in place against the rain. The network was a perfect fit for that wooded, fertile Easter island. But building this civilization began to dismantle its foundation. To clear land for crops, to get timber for transport, to use wood for fuel, the forests were cut. It was a slow retreat, a generational loss of the tree line. By the 17th century, the island was largely barren. The consequences were in the ground. Without the web of roots, the topsoil had nothing to hold it. Rains that once soaked into the forest floor now ran off the bare ground in sheets. That triggered massive erosion. The fertile earth washed into the sea, down to bedrock in places. The island's ability to sustain life was compromised. Now see the Moai roads through that change. A carefully prepared path from the quarry. It was engineered for a forested terrain with stable, soft earth. As the trees vanished and the erosion began, the ground itself started to change. Gullies could have cut across the pathway. The sunken track might have filled with silt or been scoured down to stone. More critically, the purpose of the roads evaporated. The energy to move statues was immense. It relied on a food surplus and a unified society. As the ecological crisis deepened, leading to shortages and conflict, that surplus and that unity fractured. The ritual of statue transport lost its meaning against survival. The projects were abandoned, so the roads were left incomplete. The most haunting images are the fallen Moai along these routes. They lie face down or on their sides, as if the procession just stopped mid-step. These aren't ruins in the traditional sense. They're a freeze frame. A snapshot of a process interrupted by a collapsing world. The roads didn't lead to ruined platforms. They led to a future the island could no longer support. The network became a ghost of intention, a map of ambition drawn on a landscape that couldn't fulfill the promise. It's a lesson in interconnection. The roads were built for a ritual purpose, but they were dependent on an ecological reality. When that reality was withdrawn, the purpose became a memory. The roads became fossils in the grass. They mark a path not just from quarry to coast, but from abundance to a painful new balance. What remains is a silent question across the hills. How do you navigate a road when the world it was meant for disappears behind you? the stone moai went quiet on their green roads. But up high, the highest roads are made of ice and faith. For 1,000 years, the Himalayan passes have been threads in a sacred web, the Nangpa La. A breathless corridor over 19,000 feet. It's more than a path, it's a rite for Tibetan salt traders with their loads, for pilgrims circling the whole range. These passes were chosen with care, profound care. They were picked for stability. In the most unstable realm, the cryosphere, the world of ice, the routes follow ancient moraines. The rocky debris glaciers leave behind. They cross frozen rivers. They skirt the edges of lakes, turquoise lakes, held in place by dams of ice and stone. This landscape wasn't seen as dangerous. It was seen as permanent. The ice was the reliable architecture, the roof of the world. The paths were engineered for that frozen geometry. But that permanence is an illusion, and it's melting. The climate is warming here faster than almost anywhere. The glaciers are retreating, pulling back from the valleys they carved. And as they retreat, they leave something new, something treacherous. Glacial lakes, they form in the hollows the ice leaves behind, dammed by unstable walls. Loose rock and ice debris, they're beautiful and they're ticking clocks. The event has a name, a glacial lake outburst flood, a gloff. It's as sudden as it is catastrophic. An ice dam fails, a moraine wall collapses, or an avalanche of ice crashes into the lake from above. In minutes, the whole lake can empty. A wall of water, ice, and rock roars down the valley. It has the force to reshape geography. It can scour a valley down to bedrock, move boulders the size of houses. It can erase a riverbank, a bridge that stood for centuries, gone. It can bury a trail, a meticulously maintained trail, under 50 feet of debris. So the ancient trade route, the Nangpa La, chosen for its stable passage between two glaciers. It now finds itself in a new landscape. The glaciers that framed it are smaller. The lakes that have formed below them are larger. The route itself may now sit in the path of a flood surge. From a lake that didn't even exist when the path was first established, a pilgrim following the exact footsteps of generations before could now be walking into a zone of hazard. A geological hazard that is entirely modern. This network is becoming a ghost road in real time. Its original design was for a stable cryosphere, but the cryosphere is now the most dynamic part of the system. The most unpredictable. The passes themselves haven't moved. The danger around them has been redrawn. The wisdom of the old caravan masters. They knew every crevasse, every safe camping spot. That wisdom contains no memory of this new threat. It's knowledge that has been rendered incomplete. The road was built for a mountain that wore a permanent crown of ice. The mountain is now shedding that crown, and the meltwater is rewriting the map of risk in the valleys below. To stand at such a pass today is to stand at a crossroads. Deep time and urgent change. You're tracing a path laid down by centuries of human longing, for trade, for enlightenment, and you're looking at a landscape that is fundamentally reconsidering its own structure. The very ice that provided a stable corridor is now the source of a new volatility, a liquid volatility. The ancient route waits, a line of faith across the rock. But the ground it trusts is trembling with the sound of water waiting to be unleashed. The ice pulls back and shows us things, but water can also move forward and take. The Phoenicians, they didn't just build things facing the sea, they built with the sea itself. Their home was that narrow, rich strip along the Levantine coast. Cities like Tyre and Sidon, they weren't just ports, they were fortresses, on islands or on points of land, connected to their farms and fields by these short, crucial coastal roads. That network, it was the land anchor for a sea empire. Those roads carried cedar down from the mountains to the shipbuilders. They brought olive oil and wine from the inland estates to the docks. They were the supply lines for a people who looked out toward the water, and these roads were built for a specific, stable relationship with the shore. They ran right along that shifting line where the land meets the sea, but that line has never been stable. This coast, it sits on a tectonic seam where the African plate meets the Eurasian plate. The land is slowly sinking in places, dropping under its own weight and the pressure below. At the same time, the global sea level has been climbing since the last ice age ended. The two together, it's a double hit. The land sinks down, the water rises up, the coastline is being drowned bit by bit. A harbor built in the 10th century BCE, with its stone docks and breakwaters, was made for a sea that was nearly 10 feet lower than it is now. Over thousands of years, the water has inched up those walls. It's flooded the low areas behind the city. It's turned old waterfront storehouses into the footings for modern piers. And the roads, those coastal roads that link the ports to the land behind them, they had it even worse. A road leaving the southern gate of a city, ancient Tyre, it might have run along a sandy strip or a raised ridge of beach. As the land sank and the sea rose, that passage was the first to go underwater. Storm surges would hit it more and more, until finally the road itself was permanently submerged. What was a busy road for carts and traders became a line of broken stone on the seafloor. Underwater archaeology shows this with a quiet kind of proof. Divers off Lebanon and Syria, they don't just find sunken ships, they find paved ground. They find building foundations that are now 30 feet under. They find the clear, straight lines of roadways leading out from a drowned city and into the open blue of the Mediterranean. These roads don't end at a cliff or a fallen wall. They just fade into the sand on the bottom. They are paths that lead right off the map of the land world. The network was designed for a shoreline that isn't there anymore. Its whole logic was based on a sea level that's now just a memory. The Phoenicians, they were masters of sailing, but they built their land routes on a coast that was already, in a geological sense, pulling back. Their roads were taken not by some enemy, but by the very thing they used to build their fortune. To see a sonar picture of one of these sunken roads is to see a ghost. The purest kind, it's a route that connects nothing to nothing. A fix for a problem the ocean solved by changing the rules. The land paths of history's greatest sailors now rest in the quiet world of fish and coral. They're a reminder that even the most solid ground is just a temporary place, a stage the sea can take back and will. The sea can take a coast, but the land can also just break apart. In Ecuador, in the high Andes, there's a corridor they call the Avenue of the Volcanoes, a chain of snow-capped peaks, some still active, lining a valley. Long before the Inca, cultures like the Caranqui and the Puruha lived there, and they built roads. This was the 24th network, a system of paths connecting their settlements, their sacred sites, their fields across that dramatic terrain. They engineered these roads for the landscape they saw. They followed ridge lines for the view. They crossed rivers at the stable points. They climbed slopes with switchbacks to handle the steepness. They chose the best possible line across a world that seemed solid and breathtaking, but that stability is an illusion. This valley is a battleground. It sits right on the collision of two tectonic plates. The Nazca Plate is diving under the South American Plate. That process builds the mountains, and it stores an immense amount of energy. The release of that energy is an earthquake, not a tremor, but something that alters the landscape. A single major quake here, it can do more than topple walls. It can rewrite the geography. It can cause liquefaction where solid ground turns to a fluid, swallowing roads whole. It can trigger a massive landslide, dumping millions of tons of rock into a valley, blocking a river completely. That blocked river then forms a new lake, drowning the old route. The earthquake can also uplift one side of a fault by several meters while dropping the other. A road that once crossed a gentle plain could be left broken, with one end now a cliff and the other a sunken trench. So picture a Caranqui road maintained for generations. It connects a highland village to a ceremonial complex in the valley. The path is worn smooth by countless feet. Then the earth groans and shudders. In minutes, the world is remade. The ridge the road followed is now a jagged scarp. The river ford is gone, the river itself now flowing through a new channel a mile away. A section of the valley floor has risen like a tilted table, snapping the road's continuity. The network isn't just damaged, its logic is obliterated. The road was a solution to a specific set of geographic problems. The earthquake presented a completely new set of problems. Rebuilding wasn't about filling in ruts. It meant surveying a new land, finding new passes, new fords, new stable ground. Often, it was easier to abandon the old alignment entirely and start fresh somewhere else. That makes these Andean roads unique ghosts. They aren't slowly buried by sand. They aren't drowned by rising seas. They are fractured. Their obsolescence is sudden, violent, and absolute. They were designed for a landscape snapshot, a single frame in a geologic movie of relentless rearrangement. The next frame in the sequence shatters the picture. To find one of these pre-Inca roads today is to find a fragment, a beautifully engineered segment of pavement that just stops. It might end at a sheer drop from fault uplift. It might disappear under the debris of a 1,000-year-old landslide. It's a fossil of a moment when the earth held still long enough for people to believe they could draw a permanent line upon it. The builders understood the power of the peaks they revered, but could they have truly conceived that the ground beneath their feet was just as volatile? Their roads stand as a dialogue with impermanence, a declaration of order made in the very heart of chaos. These silent paths have taken us through time across landscapes. We followed them from the sunken plains of Doggerland up to the shaking peaks of the Andes, 25 ghost networks, each one a whisper from a world that's gone. They're not just old stone or faded tracks, they're conversations, a deep, lasting dialogue between human ambition and an earth that's never quite done. Every road is a decision frozen, a choice about how to cross a river, where to ford a desert, how to connect a people. They show us how civilizations saw their world, not as a static stage but as a partner. An obstacle, a thing to be mastered. Their fate, their quiet obsolescence, that's not a story of failure. It's a lesson in humility. It tells us our most brilliant designs are answers to questions the planet might one day answer differently. We build for stability, but we build on movement. Sand shifts, water rises, ice retreats. The ground itself can decide to walk away. Now we're in our own time of deep environmental change. Our infrastructures, our coastal cities, our farms, our transportation grids, they're built on assumptions about a climate and a geology that are now in flux. These ancient ghost roads ask us to look forward with the wisdom of the past, to build not just for the world as it is, but with respect for the world as it might become. To engineer with flexibility, with foresight, with an acceptance of impermanence. Let these lost highways guide us. They remind us the most enduring legacy isn't the monument that never falls. It's the path that teaches us how to navigate change. Long after our concrete cracks and our steel rusts, what's left, what forgotten alignments from our own age will puzzle the archaeologists of the future? Will they trace a highway leading to a drowned city, find a bridge over a river that's long gone dry? The story keeps going. It's written in the choices we make on this restless